On 22nd August, leaders of the five most dominant countries of the developing world met in Johannesburg for a two-day BRICS summit. These nations are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and they are collectively known as BRICS nations. So, BRICS nations collectively contribute to over 30% of global GDP and have 40% of global population, with China and India being the most populated countries in the world, and they're also two of the largest economies in the world. Now, we have already talked about BRICS, how it came into existence, and what it does in this video, which you can check out with the link in the description. So, leaders of Brazil, India, and China arrived in South Africa, to be specific, Johannesburg, to attend the summit, whereas Russian President Vladimir Putin joined from Russia itself. Two of the main agendas of this BRICS summit were: number one, expansion of the BRICS bloc, and two, formulation or creation of a new BRICS currency. Now, let's talk about both of these agendas in detail. So, number one, let's start with expansion of BRICS bloc. Over 40 countries have applied to become a part of the BRICS bloc. Some of these countries are Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE, Egypt, Argentina, and Ethiopia. Now, as we have mentioned earlier, that BRICS is a bloc which consists of developing countries from around the world, and specifically these five countries which are considered to be the fastest growing economies of the world. So, why would over 40 countries apply to become a part of the BRICS bloc? Now, let's talk about Iran, to be specific. Now, Iran is a country that has been facing sanctions by the US, and it has nowhere else to go. Iran wants to have better trade and economic relationship with other countries and form other blocs so that it can grow as a country. And for many other countries that are willing to join this bloc, they have also in a way suffered during the COVID pandemic at the expense of the Western nations. And for some other countries, they just want to increase and explore multilateral trade and economic cooperation. And this bloc is exactly what they need. So now let's talk about countries that were already in favor of expansion of the BRICS bloc as compared to the countries that were a little bit apprehensive, but they still went on to welcome other nations into the BRICS bloc. China and Russia have been in support of expansion of the BRICS bloc right from the very beginning. Now, it is important for us to understand that China is facing a trade war with the US, whereas Russia has been fighting or is a part of a proxy war against the US, wherein the US has been funding Ukraine to fight against Russia. United States of America has contributed or funded Ukraine with over $100 billion in their fight against Russia. And Russia is also facing sanctions by the West, specifically the US. Hence, they've been in support of adding more countries to the BRICS bloc and strengthen the bloc as a whole. China is the second largest economy in the world, and not only is it at a trade war with the US, but it also wants to replace the US as a global superpower. So China and Russia, not only do they have political motives, but economic motives as well. On the other hand, we have India and Brazil, and though they are in support of welcoming new member nations into the bloc, they believe that these new member nations should follow a certain criteria and they should join the bloc with a consensus. Prime Minister Modi said that they are in support of welcoming new member nations into the BRICS bloc with consensus of other member nations as well. On the other hand, Brazil has shown support to welcome its trade neighbor Argentina to the BRICS bloc and said that it is important that Argentina joins the bloc because Argentina is right now facing a historic hyperinflation and debt repayment crisis, which started with a $44 billion loan deal with the International Monetary Fund. And then we have South Africa that has shown support to the African nations and calls for the BRICS to support the African countries in their development. So, in these 2 days, the BRICS nations have invited 6 members that initially applied to become a part of BRICS bloc. The countries that have been invited to become a part of BRICS are Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. Now, their membership starts from 1st January 2024, and they've all been keen to become a part of this bloc. Saudi Arabia and UAE are two oil exporting giants, and their becoming a part of this bloc would enhance and strengthen the trade and economic cooperation of these countries. So it is important to note that countries in the BRICS bloc, specifically China and Russia, not only are they motivated economically but politically to establish the BRICS bloc as a new world order. They want to replace the US and the Western nations and become a major part in facilitating trade around the world, with China being at the center. On the other hand, countries like India and Brazil, they have economic motives, but they do not want to break ties with the Western countries, specifically United States. They want to enhance their own economic capabilities, but they do not want to be politically involved with any of the Western nations. And that is why they've shown a neutral stance in the Ukraine and Russia situation. Brazil and India are much more interested in building strategic partnerships than replacing the current Western bloc altogether. So the second most important agenda of the BRICS Summit was the creation of a new BRICS currency. As we've already stated that Russia is currently facing sanctions by the likes of United States and other Western nations. So it cannot trade in the US dollar, and hence it can either promote its own currency in terms of trade or ask for the BRICS economies for the creation of a new currency. On the other hand, for China, the creation of a new BRICS currency would mean that China would now assert its dominance in the world. Every country, every BRICS nation has agreed to trade in their local currencies. For example, trade between India and Russia is settled in their local currencies, namely rupee and rubles, whereas trade between Russia and China is facilitated and settled in ruble and yuan. So the BRICS nations have promoted the usage of their local currencies. So while Russia and China have been pushing for the creation of a new BRICS currency, India and Brazil have shown reluctance, and for two major reasons. India believes that the creation of a new BRICS currency would mean that BRICS bloc would essentially become a Chinese bloc because of the influence of China over all the member nations that are part of BRICS, and hence it is reluctant to endorse for the creation of a new BRICS currency. And it is also important to note that the creation of this new BRICS currency is unlikely, and it is not going to happen, at least in the near future. We will not see a new BRICS currency coming into existence because, first of all, for the BRICS currency to come into existence and for it to be accepted, it needs a significant number of countries to accept it as a currency. And for that to happen, the BRICS bloc needs to become a bigger bloc. Now, with the addition of these 6 countries into the BRICS bloc, it has now become a bloc of 11 countries, but it is still not big enough like the European Union bloc for it to facilitate a new currency and for the currency to be accepted and used amongst these member nations. So unless the BRICS bloc as a whole gets bigger and invites and accepts more and more countries into the bloc, the creation of this new BRICS currency is going to be a dream. It is also important to note that the BRICS bloc as a whole has been a bloc that facilitates economic cooperation and trade amongst nations, and the member nations of this bloc, they have different political interests. For example, let's take an example of countries like India and China. They're currently going through a border dispute, and the most recent example of this border dispute took place in 2020. On the other hand, as we've mentioned earlier, that India and Brazil have put forward a neutral stance on the Ukraine and Russia situation, whereas China has shown full support to Russia in this matter. So these countries, they come together for the economic well-being of their nations, but they have different political interests. So for the BRICS bloc as a whole to work and function at 100% efficiency, it is important for all the countries to align well so that they can put forward the interests of all the member nations. And for that to happen, India and China need to join hands and resolve their disputes. For now, you could say that the current BRICS bloc consists of 2 types of countries. Number 1, countries wanting to create a new world order and replace the existing Western bloc, specifically the US, as the world's superpower. And 2, countries focusing on creating better economic opportunities for the developing world without having to replace the existing Western bloc. What are your thoughts regarding the BRICS bloc and the addition of 6 new countries in the BRICS economy? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. If you enjoyed watching this video, please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. Thank you so much.